Part 2: How Humans Earn the Trust of Deadly Predators and Their Cubs. The proving grounds of the Nexi territory stretched before Dr. Raina Wei, the crystalline landscape reflecting the dual moon's light. Here, among the most feared predatory species in the known galaxy, she would attempt something unprecedented, earning the right to treat their injured cubs. The Nexi, with their iridescent scales and lethal precision, had long been considered untamable. Their cubs were sacred, protected with devastating force from any outsider contact. But a mysterious neurological condition was affecting their young, and their own healers were at a loss. "The trial begins at dawn," rumbled Elder Crixus, her obsidian scales shifting with barely contained skepticism. "If you survive, human, you may approach our sick ones." Reyna nodded, remembering the months of preparation that had led to this moment. She had studied every scrap of information about Nexi physiology, their pack dynamics, their sacred traditions. But most importantly, she had learned to read their subtle scale patterns, the true language of their emotions. The first trial was physical. A Nexi warrior charged at her, all gleaming claws and razor teeth. But Reyna saw what others might miss, the slight blue ripple in their scales that indicated controlled movement rather than killing intent. Instead of dodging, she stood her ground, tilted her head in the exact angle of Nexi respect, and waited. The warrior pulled up short, scales flickering with surprise. "You read our signs," they said. "Few outsiders bother to learn." "Understanding comes before trust," Reyna replied in carefully practiced Nexi clicks. "I cannot heal what I do not comprehend." The second trial tested her knowledge. They brought her to their sacred nesting grounds, a privilege normally reserved for pack members. Young cubs practiced hunting moves nearby, their scales shimmering with playful patterns. But one cub moved differently, jerky, uncoordinated. "Watch," commanded Elder Crixus. "Tell us what you see." Reyna observed carefully. "The neural pathways aren't forming correctly," she explained. "See how the scales ripple against the movement pattern? In humans, we'd call it developmental synaptic disruption, but in Nexi physiology." She went on to detail her theories, watching the elder's scales shift from skepticism to interest. When she suggested a treatment combining human neurological techniques with Nexi healing traditions, their scales rippled with cautious hope. The final trial was the most dangerous. They allowed her to approach a sick cub, an unprecedented test of trust. One wrong move would mean instant death. The cub's scales flickered weakly, showing pain and fear. Reyna knelt slowly, remembering everything she'd learned about Nexi cubs. She began humming a low, rumbling tone that matched their comforting frequencies. Gradually, she incorporated the traditional healing songs she'd studied. The cub's scales shifted from fear to curiosity. When she carefully reached out, mimicking the gentle grooming gestures of Nexi parents, the cub allowed her touch. More surprisingly, it began purring, a sound Nexi never made around outsiders. "The cub trusts her," whispered one of the watchers, scales flickering with amazement. Over the following weeks, Reyna worked tirelessly with the sick cubs. She combined human medical techniques with Nexi traditions, teaching their healers while learning from them in return. The cubs improved rapidly, their movements becoming smooth and coordinated. But something else was happening too. Other Nexi began bringing their healthy cubs to observe her treatments. Young ones grew curious about humans, asking questions their species had never dared to ask before. "Why do you help us?" Elder Crixus asked one evening, watching Reyna play a coordination game with recovered cubs. "We threatened you, tested you, risked your life." "Because every species wants to protect their young," Reyna replied, smiling as a cub perfectly executed a healing exercise. "That's not a weakness, it's the greatest strength we share." The success of Reyna's work spread beyond the Nexi. Other predatory species began cautiously requesting human medical help for their cubs. The Nexi, amazingly, became advocates for human trustworthiness. Years later, when asked about the turning point in human-predator relations, historians would point to the day a human doctor knelt before a sick cub, humming ancient healing songs, proving that trust could bridge even the widest gaps between species. The Nexi would add their own perspective, that true strength lies not in fearsome weapons or deadly skills, but in the courage to care for those different from yourself. Dr. Reyna Wei's legacy lived on in the scores of human doctors who followed her path, earning the trust of the galaxy's deadliest species one cub at a time. The Nexi named her Crixidin, Guardian of Cubs, a title no outsider had ever held before. In the end, it wasn't military might or advanced technology that earned humanity its place among the stars. It was the simple yet profound ability to see past differences, to offer help without demanding submission, and to understand that every species, no matter how fierce, wants the same thing, a safe future for their young. The second great test of human trustworthiness came not through combat or diplomacy, but through an act of pure compassion. Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto found himself facing a gravely injured Nexus warrior in the medical bay of Outpost Centauri. The warrior's most precious charge, a clutch of newly hatched cubs, huddled in a protective stasis field nearby. The warrior's scales shifted between deep crimson and midnight blue, signs of both pain and fierce protectiveness. Their translator crackled with weak but determined warnings. Touch the cubs and die human. Takeshi kept his movements slow and deliberate as he treated the warrior's wounds. I understand, he said softly. They are your future, your hope. I will not approach them without permission. But fate had other plans. As he worked to stabilize the warrior's failing life signs, the outpost systems registered a critical failure in the stasis field protecting the cubs. Without immediate intervention, the delicate atmospheric balance the young ones needed would collapse. The warrior's scales flickered with desperation as they read the warning signals. Death would be preferable to failing their sacred duty to protect the cubs, yet their injuries made movement impossible. Takeshi knew he had only moments to act. I can save them, he said, meeting the warrior's fierce gaze. But you must trust me, not because you want to, but because they need you to. Something in his words, or perhaps in the unwavering steadiness of his hands as he worked, reached through the warrior's protective instincts. Their scales rippled with the deepest color of Nexus trust, a shimmering violet that few humans had ever seen. Moving with precise efficiency, Takeshi transferred the cubs to the medical bay's main containment field, adjusting the atmospheric mix to match their home worlds exactly. The young ones chirped in confusion but showed no signs of distress. If anything, they seemed curious about this strange being who moved with such care around them. The warrior watched every movement with intense focus, their scales now pulsing with a mix of anxiety and growing wonder. Takeshi didn't just handle the cubs with skill, he anticipated their needs, recognizing signs of hunger or discomfort that even some Nexus caregivers might have missed. You understand them, the warrior managed through their pain. How? I've studied your species for years, Takeshi explained as he continued his work. Not just your biology or your technology, but your culture, your traditions, your love for your young. The more I learned, the more I saw how similar we are in the things that truly matter. Over the next several days, as the warrior healed, something unprecedented occurred. The cubs began to respond to Takeshi's presence with chirps of greeting. They displayed their hunting practice attempts to him, preening when he showed appropriate appreciation for their form. Most surprisingly, they began incorporating human gestures into their play, a nod here, a wave there. They were adapting, learning, growing beyond the rigid boundaries their species had always maintained with outsiders. Word spread quickly through Nexus space. Their fiercest warrior, their most precious cubs, had not only survived but thrived in human care. More than that, the cubs showed no signs of being weakened or corrupted by the contact. Instead, they displayed an enhanced adaptability that many Nexus elders found intriguing. Delegations of Nexus scientists and warriors began arriving at the outpost, ostensibly to check on the cubs' welfare. What they found challenged centuries of beliefs about human inferiority. Here was a species that could be trusted not because they matched Nexus strength, but because they understood something deeper, that true power lies in the ability to nurture, to protect, to help life flourish in all its forms. The warrior, now healed, faced the Nexus High Council with an unprecedented request. Let the human teach others, they said, their scales shimmering with conviction, not just about our biology but about our ways. He has earned this right not through combat but through understanding. And so began the Nexus Human Exchange Program. Young Nexus warriors were sent to train alongside human medical students, while human doctors learned the sacred traditions of Nexus cub rearing. The program's success led other predatory species to reconsider their stance on human interaction. Years later, when asked about the turning point in predator-human relations, many would point to those few critical days in Outpost Centauri. The moment when a human doctor proved that the greatest strength isn't in the ability to take life, but in the wisdom to nurture it. When trust was earned not through force or diplomacy, but through the simple, profound act of caring for the young of another species. Takeshi's legacy lived on in the generations of human doctors who followed, earning the trust of the galaxy's deadliest species one cub at a time. The Nexus named him Vralkith, guardian of future, and his methods became the foundation for all future interactions between humans and predatory species. The cubs he saved grew into a new kind of Nexus warrior. They maintained their species' fierce strength and pride, but they also carried with them a deeper understanding that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is a gentle hand extended in help and the courage to accept it. The third breakthrough in human-predator relations came during the Great Migration Crisis. Dr. Rohan Patel found himself aboard the research station Helios when the distress signal arrived. The Syrinx, a nomadic species of apex predators known for their biomechanical ships and fierce protection of their young, were facing catastrophe. A quantum anomaly had destabilized their traditional breeding grounds in the Carina Nebula. Their entire fleet, over 300 ships carrying thousands of cubs in stasis, needed safe harbor until the anomaly passed. The closest sanctuary lay in human-controlled space. "They're requesting emergency docking," announced Dr. Lin Chen, Helios's chief xenobiologist. "Their stasis systems are failing. Without immediate help, they'll lose this generation of cubs." The Syrinx were among the most feared and least understood species in known space. Their massive ships, resembling prehistoric marine predators, had been the stuff of human nightmares during first contact. Yet now they approached not with weapons charged, but with their cubs' lives in human hands. Rohan made his decision. Open all docking bays, begin converting the hydroponics levels into temporary nesting grounds. He knew the risk. No non-Syrinx had ever been allowed near their cubs, but sometimes trust had to be given before it could be earned. The first Syrinx ship to dock was a nursery vessel. Its captain, a towering figure named Zareth, moved with the deadly grace of their species. Their biomechanical armor pulsed with patterns of warning and desperation. "Our cubs cannot survive standard gravity," Zareth explained, their translator struggling with the complex harmonics of their language. "The stasis fields are all that protect them, and now even those are failing." Rohan had studied what little was known about Syrinx physiology. "We can modify our gravity generators," he offered, "create zones that match your home world's conditions, but we'll need to work together, trust each other." The Syrinx captain's bioarmor rippled with conflicting patterns, necessity warred with millennia of protective instinct. Finally, they nodded. "Show us, human, show us why the Nexus speak of your kind with respect." What followed was an unprecedented collaboration. Human engineers worked alongside Syrinx technicians, combining their understanding of artificial gravity with the predator's biomechanical expertise. The hydroponics levels were transformed into a complex network of variable gravity zones, each calibrated to specific developmental stages of Syrinx cubs. The moment of truth came when the first stasis field began to fail. Rohan and his team stood ready with modified medical equipment, while Syrinx parents watched with weapons primed. The field flickered and died. The cub inside stirred, opening iridescent eyes to its new environment. Instead of distress, it showed immediate curiosity. The gravity was perfect, allowing it to float and swim through the air just as it would have in its home nebula. More stasis fields were failing, more cubs were waking, and something remarkable was happening. The young Syrinx, unburdened by their species' history of isolation, began to interact with their environment in unexpected ways. They were fascinated by the hydroponics plants, their biomechanical appendages gently mimicking the swaying of leaves. They watched the human medical team with bright interest, attempting to copy their gestures. Most surprisingly, they began incorporating human laughter into their communication patterns. "They're adapting," Zareth observed, their armor now showing patterns of wonder. "Not just surviving, thriving, growing stronger through change." Over the next few months, as the quantum anomaly slowly dissipated, the Syrinx cubs transformed their temporary refuge into something unprecedented, a true interspecies nursery. They taught human children their zero-gravity games while learning Earth songs. Their biomechanical capabilities evolved to interface seamlessly with human technology. The adult Syrinx, watching their cubs develop new abilities and understanding, began to question their species' traditional isolation. The cubs were becoming more adaptable, more innovative, without losing any of their predatory strength or cultural identity. When the anomaly finally cleared, the Syrinx High Command arrived to escort their fleet home. They found not a makeshift refugee camp, but a thriving community, cubs stronger and more capable than any in their history, and humans who had earned their trust not through submission, but through genuine care and understanding. The High Command made an unprecedented decision. The modified hydroponics levels of Helios would become a permanent Syrinx nursery. Young ones would come here not just in emergencies, but to learn from both species, to grow beyond the limitations of isolation. "You have taught us something vital," Zareth told Rohan during the signing of the formal agreement. "Strength isn't just in the ability to protect our cubs from change, but in helping them adapt to it, in letting them show us new possibilities." Years later, the Helios nursery became a model for interspecies cooperation. The Syrinx cubs who grew up there became bridges between worlds, their biomechanical capabilities enhanced by human creativity, their predatory instincts tempered by understanding. Rohan's legacy lived on in the annual Syrinx migration, when their mighty fleet would dock at human stations not in desperation, but in celebration of a trust that had begun in crisis and grown into something far more profound. The cubs born in these shared spaces carried within their biomechanical systems a new pattern, one that spoke not of isolation and fear, but of adaptation and hope. The greatest testament to this transformation came from the cubs themselves. They developed a new game, teaching younger ones to shift their biomechanical patterns to mimic both Syrinx strength and human adaptability. They called it Bridge Between Stars, a living symbol of how trust, once earned, could reshape even the fiercest of species into something greater than they had ever imagined themselves to be. The most challenging test of human-predator trust came not through crisis or necessity, but through choice. The Drachnid Empire, the most ancient and feared predatory species in the known galaxy, had watched silently as humans earned the trust of other predator species. Now they had made an unprecedented request. Dr. Aisha Rahman stood before the Drachnid High Council, their massive crystalline forms towering above her. Unlike other predator species, the Drachnid had never been forced to seek human help. Their technology was superior, their empire vast, their power unquestioned. Yet here they were, asking for something that shook the foundations of their society. "Our cubs are dying," the first speaker's voice resonated through the chamber, crystal fragments catching the light of their binary suns. "Not their bodies, their spirit. They reject our traditions, our ways. They speak of change." The real reason behind this crisis was left unspoken. Young Drachnid had seen how other predator species had evolved through contact with humans, how the Nexus cubs had gained adaptability without losing strength, how Syrinx young ones had grown beyond their ancestors' limitations. "We have observed your methods," another council member hummed. "The ways you teach predator young to be strong without losing their ability to grow. We request your help." The request itself was revolutionary. The Drachnid Empire had ruled through pure strength for millennia. To admit they needed help with their own cubs was unprecedented. Aisha understood the gravity of this moment. "I would be honored," she said carefully, "but I must be clear, I won't simply tell your cubs what to think or how to be. My role would be to help them discover their own path while respecting your traditions." The chamber erupted in crystalline harmonics, the Drachnid equivalent of intense debate. Finally, the first speaker raised their primary crystal array, silencing the others. "Show us," they commanded. The next day, Aisha found herself in the sacred creche, the most heavily guarded location in Drachnid space. Young ones in various stages of crystalline development floated in nutrient fields, their forms shifting between solid and energy states as they matured. The oldest cubs were the most troubled. Their crystal structures showed signs of instability, reflecting their inner turmoil. They were caught between ancient traditions and a changing galaxy, their very forms unable to find harmony between the two. Instead of lecturing or imposing rules, Aisha did something that shocked the Drachnid observers. She asked the cubs questions. What did they think about their empire's role in the galaxy? How did they see their own future? What did strength mean to them? At first, the cubs were hesitant, their crystalline forms flickering with uncertainty. But gradually, encouraged by Aisha's genuine interest, they began to speak. They talked about wanting to explore beyond empire borders, about seeing strength in adaptation rather than just dominance, about building bridges instead of barriers. Most surprisingly, they spoke of their fears not of other species, but of disappointing their elders, of failing to live up to thousands of years of tradition. This vulnerability, this honesty, was not the Drachnid way. Yet in expressing it, their crystal structures began to stabilize, finding new patterns that combined traditional strength with emotional awareness. Aisha worked with the cubs daily, helping them develop what she called adaptive resonance, the ability to maintain their core identity while growing in new directions. She brought in young ones from other predator species, letting them share their experiences of balancing tradition with change. The transformation was gradual but profound. The cubs learned to shift their crystalline forms in ways that honored their heritage while embracing new possibilities. They developed unique harmonics that could bridge communication gaps between species. Most importantly, they found pride in being both drachnid warriors and agents of positive change. The adults watched in amazement as their troubled young ones grew into something unexpected, drachnid who were even stronger than their ancestors, but in new ways. They could still dominate through force, but they chose to lead through understanding. Their crystal forms became more complex, more beautiful, incorporating patterns inspired by other species while remaining distinctly drachnid. 6 months into the program, the first speaker summoned Aisha again. "You have not weakened them," they observed, their tone carrying subtle harmonics of wonder. "You have helped them become more than we imagined possible." "Strength comes in many forms," Aisha replied. "Your cubs have taught me as much as I've taught them. They show us that growth doesn't mean abandoning who you are, it means becoming a fuller version of yourself." The impact of the drachnid transformation rippled through the galaxy. The most powerful predator empire in known space began to change, led by cubs who understood that true strength lay not in standing alone, but in growing together. They established the first drachnid diplomatic academy, teaching young ones from all species how to blend strength with wisdom. Years later, when asked about the turning point in their history, the drachnid would point not to any great military victory, but to the day they chose to trust a human with their most precious resource, their cub's future. The young ones who graduated from Aisha's program became known as the Crystal Bridge Generation, their very forms a testament to how tradition and progress could coexist in harmony. Aisha's legacy lived on in the Drachnid Harmony Protocols, a new approach to raising predator young that spread throughout the galaxy. It taught that the fiercest strength lies not in refusing to change, but in having the courage to grow while remaining true to one's core nature. The cubs had shown the way, turning ancient crystal songs into new harmonies that would echo through the stars for generations to come. The ultimate test of the trust between humans and predator species came during the Quantum Cascade Crisis. Dr. Zara Malik stood in the command center of Unity Station, watching as the massive quantum storm approached. Behind her, representatives from every major predator species had gathered, Nexus warriors, Syrinx captains, Drachnid elders, and more. All of them faced the same terrible choice. The quantum disruption would affect cubs most severely, they're developing neural patterns vulnerable to permanent damage. The station's quantum shields could protect roughly 30% of the population. The decision of who to save seemed impossible. "The cubs take priority," came the unanimous response from every species present. But there was a catch. The protected sections wouldn't have room for adult caregivers. The young ones would be alone. That's when Zara proposed something unprecedented. "The human children," she said, "their neural plasticity makes them more resistant to quantum disruption. With minimal shielding, they could survive and help care for the predator cubs." The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Every species present would have to trust human children, some as young as 10, with their precious cubs during a crisis. A decade ago, the very suggestion would have sparked violence. First to step forward was Krixar, a young Nexus warrior who had been one of the cubs saved during the first trust-building encounters. "I was raised partly by humans," they said, scales shimmering with conviction. "Let me help coordinate between human caregivers and our young ones." Over the next 40 hours, Unity Station transformed. The most shielded sections became massive nurseries equipped for every species. Human children received crash courses in caring for different species cubs, their young minds absorbing the information with remarkable speed. When the time came, over 500 cubs from 24 predator species were secured in the shielded sections. 50 human children, led by 14-year-old Priya Singh, would serve as their primary caregivers. Krixar and a handful of other predator youths who had grown up in cross-species programs would assist. The storm hit with devastating force. Outside the shielded areas, adults of all species struggled against neural disruption, but inside the nursery, something remarkable happened. The human children began singing simple, soothing songs they had learned from various species. Nexus cubs joined with their purring harmonies. Syrinx young ones added their biomechanical resonances. Drachnid cubs contributed crystalline tones. The combined frequencies created an unexpected effect, a natural neural stabilization field that helped protect everyone within range. For 72 hours, the human children worked in shifts, maintaining order among hundreds of predator cubs. They handled everything from feeding times to emotional crises, drawing on their training and their natural ability to adapt and empathize. Krixar moved between groups, their presence reassuring cubs who had never been separated from their parents before. The human children organized the space into specialized care zones, created new games that incorporated different species' needs, and even developed improved communication methods between species that normally couldn't interact. When the storm finally passed, the adults rushed to the nursery, unsure what they would find. They discovered all the cubs not just safe but thriving. A human girl was teaching a group of drachnid cubs how to modulate their crystalline tones to communicate with Nexus young ones. Syrinx cubs were showing human children how to navigate in zero gravity. "It's beautiful," Zara whispered, watching a Nexus cub gently help a younger human child understand their scale patterns. They didn't just survive, they created something entirely new. The quantum crisis became a turning point in galactic history. The sight of human children successfully protecting and nurturing the cubs of the galaxy's deadliest predators fundamentally changed how humanity was viewed among the stars. The Unity Station model was adapted across known space. Mixed species education became the norm rather than the exception. The human capacity for adaptation and empathy, once seen as a weakness by predator species, was recognized as perhaps the most valuable trait a spacefaring species could possess. Years later, Zara stood in the vastly expanded Unity Station, watching graduates of that first crisis nursery take their places as leaders in the galactic community. Krixar had become the first non-human head of the interspecies cultural exchange program. Human children who had served as emergency caregivers grew into respected xenobiologists, diplomats, and teachers. "Did you ever imagine it would come to this?" asked Zareth, the Syrinx captain who had first trusted humans with their cubs during the migration crisis. Their biomechanical armor now pulsed with patterns of contentment. Zara smiled, watching a new generation of mixed species young ones play together in the station's central garden. "I hoped," she said, "but the reality is better than anything we could have imagined. We didn't just earn trust, we created a whole new way of seeing strength." In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society wasn't technology or military might. It was the simple yet profound demonstration that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the ability to care, to adapt, and to bring out the best in others.